You're listening to The Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Hristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to The Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Hristodoulou, and it's that time again. Predictions on a Friday going into week number 15 of the NFL. We are fast approaching the end of the season with 4 weeks of football left to play, including this one here. Back to full 16 game slates, to go through as well. So we've got 15 games. We obviously did Thursday night's game yesterday, started off the week with a win, and we're looking to rack up a few more of those as well. As a reminder, this is not a betting channel. I think it's been a little bit since I've mentioned that. I don't mean to forget. It just kind of slips my mind. We just make picks here. We talk football. We look at games. That's what we're doing here. And I guess I can say I'm kind of good at it. I don't know. You tell me. That being said, comment down below. Let me hear your thoughts. Dive into that comment section. Who's winning? Who's losing? Why are they going home with W's and L's? I want to hear from you all. But beginning with the first matchup here, the 1 o'clock window, Dallas goes into Carolina to take on the Panthers. And I'll be honest, I really don't have a ton on this game here because there are games every single week, especially when you get to this point in the season where you have two pretty bad teams going up against each other, and they're both kind of trending in the wrong direction. And I would say maybe the Panthers more so than the Cowboys in this current situation here, but this is a tough game to pick because you have Cooper Rush on one side being quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, as this team has kind of fallen apart this season due to injuries, and they've sustained even more coming out of last week's game against the Bengals. And you have, of course, the Carolina Panthers, who have gone through quite a bit this season with the benching and eventual return of Bryce Young. If you have a favorite in this game, I would love to hear an explanation as to why, because I don't really think it's that cut and dry. As if you want to look at the Cowboys and go, well, they have a better record, maybe some better players, sure. But for what it's worth, the Panthers have kept it pretty close in their last 3 games, even though they lost them all one-possession matchups to the Chiefs, Eagles, and Buccaneers. And those Eagles-Chiefs games were far closer than I think anyone anticipated. Meanwhile, the Cowboys themselves, they've been in some tight matchups themselves their last 3 games. Offense has shown a little bit of decline in those 3 weeks. They had back-to-back wins over Washington and New York, and then ultimately losing last week to Cincinnati, seeing 7 points less put up on the board each and every single week as they went through those 3 games there. But for me, I just think that right now there is a little bit more top-end talent still left, despite all the injuries they have in Dallas for the Cowboys. So I think I am going to lean Cowboys in this one here, but I wouldn't be shocked to see again the Panthers keep it tight, the Cowboys in another tight contest. So I have Dallas winning, but I have them winning 20-17. Next game we're going to look at is the Kansas City Chiefs going into Cleveland to take on the Browns. And the first thing I've got to say is this Kansas City Chiefs team has got to start getting back into the end zone. No more settling for 4 field goals in a game. Going on 19-17 victories in back-to-back weeks was quite a sight to see for this Chiefs team. They need to get back in the end zone. And honestly, things could get pretty wild for them in the next few weeks, as both Harrison Butker is set to come back, which they've been all right in the kicking game despite not having him around. But Marquise Brown's practice window has been opened up as well. He's potentially going to be back in the next few weeks here, and we'll see a basically a fully loaded and healthy Chiefs offense at this point here. But that is down the road. This week's matchup, the big thing that I'm looking at here, left tackle DJ Humphries matching up against edge rusher Myles Garrett. This could potentially be a problem for Kansas City here, and why the Browns maybe make this game a little bit closer than some people anticipate. Humphries allowed 8 pressures and 2 sacks last week in the 40 pass blocks that he had in his Kansas City Chiefs debut. And Myles Garrett this season, I mean, he's been on pretty much a tear as he typically is, but he is currently sitting at a 19.3% pressure rate, which is the best since 2018. And the reason I stopped at that date is because that's the furthest back that Next Gen Stats list goes until. So it's his best that they have recorded so far through a season to this point, with 11 sacks on top of that as well. He's lined up on the right edge nearly 80% of his snaps this season, so he's going to see a lot of DJ Humphries. DJ Humphries is going to see a lot of him. That matchup can borderline dictate how this game goes, because if Myles Garrett's winning those matchups and he's given Humphries a difficult time all game long, there's a good chance that maybe we see another interception from Mahomes, maybe a few failed third downs that would typically be a converted third down type of deal. We have seen the hiccups from the offense of the Chiefs this year, so definitely keeping an eye on that. And then rain being in the forecast fast for this game. The last I checked, we're looking at I think it was a 50-50%, something like that, 50-55, percent chance of rain, give or take. That can obviously change between now and Sunday, but there is a slight chance for some rain, and I think that's worth bringing it up because if it is raining, as we saw in last night's Thursday night football game, things can get messy, especially when it comes to trying to throw the football here, and running the ball may become crucial for either one of these teams if they want to get the win here. Chiefs are averaging about 111 yards per game on the ground to the Browns just 88. The Browns have had no real run game just about all season, and even since Nick Chubb has come back, he's struggled to really get back to form, and to no surprise, really. That's one of those injuries where him coming back this year, I never really anticipated him to just go back to his previous form. That's one of those things where it's probably going to take more time, and we won't see closer to Nick Chubb and what he was until next year. So not to knock against him, but it's definitely something worth keeping in mind here. And then when you look at what these two teams do defensively, Kansas City allowing just about 88 yards per game. I believe they're the second best run defense in the NFL right now in terms of yards per game allowed. Then the Browns, of course, allowing about 128 yards per game themselves. So about a 40-yard difference in per game allowance by both these teams here. Running the football could be crucial for either one of these teams. And with Isaiah Pacheco back in the fold over there in Kansas City, could be a problem for Cleveland. I like the Chiefs in this game, but I do think that there is a chance with the way these two teams match up right now that maybe Cleveland keeps the game a little bit closer. But Jameis Winston's interceptions coupled with just an ineffective ground game in Cleveland has me a little bit worried. Jerry Jeudy has been going off, and that is definitely something else to keep in mind on Cleveland's end as well. He and Jameis Winston clearly have a really good connection, but I like the Chiefs 23-16. Browns hang around. Once again, another one-possession tight contest for the Chiefs, but I think they do get the job done in Cleveland. Next, we'll look at an AFC clash between the Miami Dolphins and the Houston Texans. Jalen Petrie is officially done for the season. He is going to have surgery on a chest injury he has. And Odell Beckham Jr. was also officially released this morning as well. So some transactions on both sides of this game. I think first and foremost for the Houston Texans, if they want to come out victorious in this matchup here, they have got to disrupt Tua Tagovailoa. And I've talked about this a lot this season since since the Dolphins lost Tua in Miami. And then, of course, when he eventually came back, we saw an offense that was completely different, and it showed us just how important Tua is to the operation in there in Miami. And simply disrupting him is a tall task, but it's really what you have to do to be able to stop this Miami offense here. Tua leads the league in time to throw right now at just 2.4 seconds per throw. So he's averaging on the underside of what the next gen stats consider a quick throw. Nobody gets the ball out quicker than he does because of the way the offense is just designed as a whole. It's all about just getting into a rhythm, get the ball in your playmakers' hands. They have so many explosive guys there, and this game being indoors is going to be a benefit to Miami. It's plus side for Texans because it's at home for them, but Miami thrives playing at Miami in clean weather, and they also thrive in indoor games like this as well. So Houston could be the perfect foil for Miami's offense. They actually have the second fastest get off in the NFL per snap at just 0.7 seconds for the defensive line. So if there was a team that you needed to pick to disrupt what Miami does offensively, Houston's the team to potentially do it. On the flip side of things, Texans pass protection is definitely something I'll be keeping an eye on here. They have been struggling to keep CJ Stroud upright this season, allowing the third highest pressure rate on top of that with the 42 sacks that they've allowed. And the Texans have allowed at least one sack in every single game this season, and they have 7 different games where they've allowed 3 sacks or more, and that number has gotten as high as 8 sacks in a singular game. So it's definitely been a problem for the Texans, and Miami's pass rush maybe hasn't been great the entirety of the season, but when you look at their last 5 games, they've racked up 14 total sacks, which is nearly about 3 per game. This is definitely something that could pose an issue for the Texans. That being said, I do think, though, I like Houston just a little bit more in this contest. I am worried about that pass protection. It is something that if the Texans wind up losing, I won't be surprised if I go back to the stat sheet and we see the Texans maybe allow 3, 4, 5 sacks in the game and CJ Stroud's getting hit multiple times in the game here. But I think I do like I look at Houston as maybe a little bit more of a well-rounded team overall. It's just the pass protection that really has me worried right now, and that is something that could ultimately be the foil in this game here. But especially being in Houston too, I think that works in their favor. So I'll take the Texans 27-24. Very fun contest. The next game we're going to look at, it's another one of those games that I really wish I did not have to pick, but here we are. We have the New York Jets going into Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars. Jacksonville winning their first game last week since Week 7 against the Patriots, 10-6 over the Tennessee Titans. This is a Jacksonville Jaguars team that is in about as bad of a way as you could possibly be, between just their overall season record, what we've seen from this defense not being able to stop a nosebleed against the pass. Mac Jones is currently leading the way because Trevor Lawrence is done for the season with his shoulder injury that he's going to be getting surgery on in his non-throwing shoulder. And then, of course, there's just kind of this feeling of like, when is Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke going to be fired? And at this point, I'm not a Jaguars fan, but I'm sitting here wondering why that hasn't already happened. And my biggest argument for that isn't even the state of this team and just where they are this season. I have a really big problem with the way Trevor Lawrence's health has been handled by this team over the last couple of seasons, from last year and even into this year. Between letting him play that game against the Texans a few weeks ago that ultimately led to them just completely shutting it down for Lawrence, to just how banged up Trevor Lawrence was last season at the tail end of the year and being allowed to play, at some point the coaching staff and or front office needs to step in and kind of save a player from themselves. And I feel like the front office is not doing that. And you're throwing caution to the wind to a guy that you're paying, what is it, like $250 or some odd $1 million to be your franchise guy over the next decade. Someone needs to be able to go to Trevor Lawrence prior to that Texans game where he got completely laid out and concussed and tell him, listen, man, doctors are saying maybe we should shut it down. There's no reason Trevor Lawrence should have even been in the position that he was in to get concussed and knocked out of that game the way he did, because he should have been done for the season already. He's literally getting surgery on the shoulder issue that people were questioning prior to him even coming back from, and it being something that was going to get him shut down. And now they're saying it has nothing to do with the concussion. It has to do with the shoulder. Then why the hell was he playing to begin with? Why was he allowed to play so banged up at the tail end of last season? Somebody needs to step in and tell Trevor Lawrence, you are so banged up, you're not playing. I understand he's a grown man, but there's a reason why there's a coaching staff, there's a medical staff, there's a front office, and I just feel like nobody is taking care of Trevor Lawrence's health, or at least, going to him and being like, listen, dude, we got to shut it down. Now, obviously, he's finally getting surgery, and I'm ranting here at this point. I don't agree with how that situation was handled at all, and I'm curious to hear what Jaguars fans think. On the flip side, though, you have the Jets, who Aaron Rodgers, despite finally throwing for 300 yards since the first time since December 12th of 2021, that is a wild stat, still couldn't get the job done, still couldn't win the football game. They lost in overtime ultimately to Miami. The Jets are also dealing with a load of injuries right now on both sides of the football, and Aaron Rodgers' future is about as uncertain as it has ever been in his career to this point here, with that Enigma documentary coming out and all. This is one of those games where honestly both of these teams would benefit from losing, but somebody has to win unless they ultimately just end in a tie. But this is a game that both teams could honestly benefit from just taking the L and calling it a day. That being said, I think I cannot even believe I'm saying this because I just swore off the Jets last week, but I think I trust at least the roster to some extent more than what we've gotten from Jacksonville. You know what? I'm calling an audible here. No, I'm not. Jets are going to win this game. I have no idea who's going to win this game. I literally am picking a team for the sake of picking a team in this one here. Don't listen to anything I have to say with this game because I genuinely don't know who's going to win. I'm taking the Jets 21-14. I really hope I'm right on this one because the Jets have burned me so many times this season. I literally swore them off last week and they damn near gave me a heart attack taking Miami to overtime. But I'm going to take the Jets here because I think the Jaguars are in a little bit more of a bad way than New York is to get the job done. But this is my least confident pick of the week. Next, we'll look at the Washington Commanders going into New Orleans to take on the Saints, and Jake Haener will be leading the way for the Saints offense here as Derek Carr went down with 2 injuries, not 1, but 2 against the Giants with the fracture and the concussion he suffered in a diving attempt during the game last week. Commanders are coming off a win that snapped a 3-game losing skid, and both of these teams are in very different situations right now, and the way I look at it right now, the Saints are, especially now that they've lost Derek Carr again for potentially the rest of the season here, I think this team should be good with just kind of losing out the rest of the way. Obviously, that's not going to be the case. I'm sure they're going to fight to the very finish line, but I don't see what the benefit is of winning any more football games, the current state of this roster. So just get a better draft pick. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now for New Orleans. That being said, I think a couple things that really stand out to me. The rushing attack of Washington has been very good this season, and the run defense in New Orleans has not. You look at what the run defense in New Orleans has allowed at that 134 yards per game, which is good for 8th most in the NFL, and Washington's offense, about 157 yards per game, which ranks 3rd best in the NFL. They have the 1st place rushing success rate on top of that. Washington gets the job done on the ground, and if they know that they're going up against one of the worst run defenses in the NFL, they will take advantage of that. I think they have no issues doing so. Washington loves to design runs for Jaden Daniels, and they have the 3rd highest success rate running them, and you're going up against a New Orleans team that struggles against that, being ranked 29th, so I expect a lot of running from this Washington Commanders offense. And then on top of that, if you just look at the Saints and their offensive ability to move the football without Derek Carr, not including the Chiefs game, I mean, 27 points scored in the game versus Tampa Bay, but when you start to look at that number, you can thank some assistance for some Baker Mayfield interceptions, one of them setting them up, I believe it was like 10 yards out from the goal line. You also had a special teams touchdown in that game as well, so you can chop that number down by 14. And then you also have the 18 points combined versus the Broncos and Chargers. This offense minus Derek Carr is basically dead in the water in my eyes, so I'm going Commanders, and I have them winning 30-17. This is one where I think that they can start to run away with things, and we've seen Washington against some of the lesser opponents they've faced really get crazy with the scoring, so this feels like another one of those games. I'll take the Commanders. This next one here, and as I mentioned, we are not a betting channel, but the Ravens going into New York to take on the Giants. I always love looking at the betting odds just to see what the thought process is in Vegas, and minus 16.5 looks like a fake, like boosted number or something like that. That does not seem like your standard line for an NFL football game. So Ravens minus 16.5, no one really giving the Giants a chance right now, and I think that's fair. You look at the way these two teams stack up, 29.5 points per game scored by this Ravens offense, which is good for 3rd best in the NFL to the Giants' league worst 15 points per game scored. The only way I really see Baltimore maybe allowing this game to be very close or flirting with the possibility that maybe the Giants come away with the win is going to be Baltimore just not playing disciplined football. And the reason I bring that up is because one of the issues I do have with Baltimore is their lack of discipline. They lead the league in penalties right now with 104 total committed this season. Playing at New York, playing smart and not giving the Giants more opportunities than they deserve to upset you is certainly something that is in the back of my mind for this Ravens team. But I mean, when you just comparatively look at the two teams, they're both on just completely opposite ends of the spectrum. But Baltimore has been prone to dropping games they should not be dropping, and in pretty wild fashion on top of that as well. So I wouldn't completely count out the Giants. There is definitely that sliver of hope with what we've seen from the Ravens this season in certain situations. I go back to that Raiders game a lot, even the Browns game too, that they lost to the Browns. And I watch those games and I go, how did you not come away with wins here? How is this team sitting at what is their record right now? 8-5, not sitting at 10-3 right now instead, and being further along in this potential divisional race that they could have been having with the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. So I like Baltimore. I think they're going to win. I have them winning 28-10, but also just do not be shocked if the Giants do anything crazy and keep this game close. And if you end up looking at it, it's because the Ravens give them 100 yards worth of penalties in a game. They have been a little undisciplined, but that's really the only way. The Giants win because the Ravens are shooting them in the foot. That would be like the scenario that leads to that end result. Next, we have the Bengals going into Tennessee to take on the Titans. Now, when you're facing the Bengals defense, you never really know what you're going to get from them, and it's typically not a lot, but you never really know what you're going to get with them this season. But the expectations are never that high, and I think you can kind of say that about the Tennessee Titans quarterback situation with Will Levis as well. You never really know what you're going to get from him. The expectations are never high, but you're certainly in store for something, and we've seen some pretty wacky turnovers being delivered at the hands of Will Levis, whether it's diving fumbles or pick sixes, whatever it may be. Will Levis has done it at some point this season. Now, the first thing I'm looking at, the Bengals passing offense, which has been absolutely on fire for the bulk majority of the season. Joe Burrow right now, first in passing yards, first in touchdowns. He only has 6 interceptions on top of the 33 touchdowns here. Or it might be 5. I think that number's wrong. I might have actually hit 6 instead of 5. I feel like the number's 5. Maybe it is 6. I'm not sure. One of those two. But then Jamar Chase, 93 receptions, 1,300 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns. He's first in all of those receiving categories. He's on pace right now to potentially lock up the elusive triple crown for a wide receiver. But you're going up against a Tennessee passing defense that is allowing only 175 yards per game and about 5.7 yards per play. Both of those top 5 numbers, the yards per game allowed, being best in the NFL. The pass rush is ranked no higher than 21st when it comes to sacks, pressure rate, and sack rate for Tennessee. But Tennessee, for what it's worth, even with injuries that they've dealt with, like Lenora Sellers missing time, or not Lenora Sellers, my goodness, that is not who I'm talking about here. L'Jarius Sneed, got college football in my mind as well right now. One of the things I think is this is a defense that has played really well, especially in the secondary, despite injuries that they've dealt with. And honestly, a team that maybe I haven't given as much credit as is deserved for how well they've played. And I mean, it wasn't too long. I would say, this probably a little bit more than a month ago, I was saying that I thought these numbers were maybe a little bit fraudulent just because of the teams they were playing. And in hindsight, it seems like I might have been wrong because that number has stuck to this point in the season. They've gone against some good opponents. That being said, if the Titans want to have any real chance of winning this football game here, they've got to get going on the ground, and I want to see them run it through Tony Pollard. With 937 rushing yards so far this season, ranked 9th in the NFL, and a rushing success rate that's hanging around 20th in the league, I would like to see them attack this Bengals defense on the ground because they have been prone to letting teams move with their running backs. Their average is about 130 yards per game allowed on the ground, but in the last 3 games that they've played, twice they have allowed over 150 yards rushing, and their number as far as next-gen stats go, plus 275 on the rushing yards over expected, which is second worst in the league. You can run against this Bengals team, and with just how wishy-washy you can have Will Levis be in certain games, lead with Tony Pollard, see what you can do on the ground, see if you can find success going there. But I do like the Bengals here. But I think there's a chance we might see some points. Like I said, I don't really trust this Bengals defense a lot, and I feel like they're prone to letting teams score more than they should allow. I would not be shocked to see this end up being maybe a slightly higher scoring affair. So I have Cincinnati winning 30-23. Now going into the desert, the New England Patriots going into Arizona to take on the Cardinals. Both of these teams come in on a 3-game losing streak, so someone has the opportunity to snap that losing skid. The Cardinals have a little bit more on the line right now as far as winning is concerned here because they want to try to keep themselves in the playoff race sitting at 6-7. Meanwhile, the Patriots, if they win this game, they knock themselves out of the 3rd pick in the draft that they are currently sitting on right now. So winning means far more to the Cardinals than it does the Patriots. You look at these teams right now, Kyler Murray, 8-23 in week 11 or later in his career, which is a crazy stat to see, considering he's a starting quarterback that is pretty good for the most part. I think the big thing here for this game is how these defenses wind up containing the opposing quarterbacks. Both of these QBs have no issues taking off with the football. And oddly enough, since week 6, Drake May has been one of the most effective rushing and scrambling QBs in the NFL with the 33 runs he has for 335 yards and 129 rushing yards over expected. He has been supremely effective on the ground and is a big reason why everyone's starting to rave about what he can do because he has the arm talent, but he's also got great decision making with where he's choosing to take off with running the ball. He has been a little too ambitious sometimes, letting himself get hit, but overall, when it comes to deciding when to run, he's pretty damn good at it. And then, of course, you have Kyler Murray, who's pushing near 450 yards on the ground, 4 touchdowns on the ground as well, 7.7 yards per attempt. We all know what Kyler Murray can do with his legs when he gets going. So both these quarterbacks are mobile enough that they need to be contained. The other thing, a matchup that I'm really looking forward to seeing in this contest here is going to be Christian Gonzalez going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. here. Gonzalez has been really good. He has turned into that number 1 corner that the Patriots drafted him to be last season, which is 39 receptions allowed in 441 coverage snaps this season. He has a completion rate of about 54.2%, so about a 50-50 shot. You get that completion or not on Gonzo with just 2 touchdowns allowed and 2 interceptions on top of that. It's been a very good season for Gonzalez. Now, Marvin Harrison Jr., he's had a bit of an up and down rookie campaign. He's only had 2 games with 100 yards or more. And I mean, he's sitting on 7 touchdowns, about 650 yards. So maybe not quite the season everyone was hoping for in year number 1 for what a lot of people, and even myself included, considered like the premier talent coming out of this draft. Like this is a gold jacket selection, son of the Marvin Harrison Jr., who played with Peyton Manning on the Colts. A lot of high expectations for him. Maybe it takes some time. Maybe this Arizona Cardinals offense needs a little bit more to help him get going. We'll see what happens there. But I still think that he's a stud, a guy that I expect to see have a very long and illustrious career in the league. Sometimes guys start a little bit slower than others. We'll see. But this is a matchup overall that I'm really excited for. As for who I think is going to win, though, like I said, the Arizona Cardinals have a lot more to play for, in my opinion, and a win here only hurts the Patriots. They've got 3 on the season. They could maybe rack up their final win in this game here, but I personally looked at the game against the Colts as kind of their last winnable game. That was prior to me really seeing this 3-game losing skid unfold with Arizona, so there is definitely more of a shot this week than maybe I would have imagined a few weeks ago coming into it, but I do like the Cardinals, but I like them 25-22, something along that. A tighter win because the Patriots have kept some of their losses very close as recently as their last game against the Colts, but I do think Arizona has a little bit more in the tank. And speaking of Indianapolis, the next game we're looking at, Colts going into Denver to take on the Broncos. This game has massive implications for what can happen with the number 7 seed in the AFC right now. Denver, of course, hanging on to that number 7 seed, sitting at 8-5 with a Colts team that is in the hunt right now. They're actually technically the number 8 seed. They are the team on the outside looking in right now. So they absolutely have to beat this Broncos team if they want to have any real shot. They need a lot more to fall their way, including even more wins and Denver dropping a handful more games, but taking a win here would go a long way in them trying to keep their playoff hopes alive. That being said, as far as the actual matchup goes, a couple of things I'm really looking at here. A lot of it has to do with what happens in the trenches in this game, in my opinion. And first and foremost, this Colts pass protection against what has been an unbelievable Broncos pass rush, one that we have been praising week in and week out here on the show. The Broncos, they are first in sacks right now. They are second in sack rate, second in pressure rate, led by Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper. You also have John Franklin Myers, Zach Allen, and Jonah Ellis. All 5 of those guys have 5 sacks or more this season. Jonah Ellis has been a guy that I've very much enjoyed. He was one that when I saw him coming into Denver, I was extremely excited because I was like, this is a perfect fit when you consider the guys that are already there and just how good this team was. And at this point right now, I have a hard time arguing any other pass rush over Denver. I look at them and I think that they are the cream of the crop, and they're so young is the other part. Like, they're very good and very young, and give this unit another year or two, and are you kidding me? Like, this group could literally be together for another 2 years at least, and you're talking a serious threat to opposing offensive lines. The Colts themselves, they come into this game, and honestly, they've looked pretty good protecting Anthony Richardson. They haven't actually allowed a sack in the last couple of games against the Patriots and the Lions. However, right tackle Braden Smith is out for this game. Ryan Kelly continues to be questionable. He's been dealing with an injury the last few weeks here. And so the offensive line isn't in a perfect state right now. We'll see what happens with them. But when we see Anthony Richardson under pressure, things get a little bit ugly. So it's going to be up to them to protect him, because a 37.6% completion rate versus the pressure this season is not something you can bank on to help you get a win. The other thing I'm looking at is just Bo Nix and the Colts being able to pressure him. And this honestly has less to do with what happens when you pressure Bo Nix at this point and more so about what happens when you don't. Bo Nix is a rookie. He's going to struggle against some of those fancy blitzes that you're seeing in the NFL right now, or just the overall pass rushing schemes that you get. It's not exactly the same as what you're getting in college. They're far more complex, and there's a lot more stunts and things like that, things that you wouldn't necessarily see. That being said, for a while, for me, he's a completely different guy when he's under pressure and when he's not under pressure. And the more I've kind of accepted, he's a rookie, and honestly, he's gotten a little bit better under pressure. But now when you start to really just look at his numbers, when he's in a clean pocket and you're giving him the time, he's killing opposing defenses, 13 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions with a 70% completion rate. As a rookie, when you give him the time, he is going to dice you up, plain and simple. Colts pass rush this season, I would say about average, 15th in total sacks with 32, 16th in pressure rate. If they can't get to Bo Nix, right now, as the Colts secondary currently stands and has stood for a large majority of the season, young and experienced, some injuries as well, other than like Kenny Moore, obviously Julian Blackmon's been there for a little bit, but a lot of really young guys overall in that secondary. Bo Nix could have himself a field day against this team. It's one of those things that I'll be keeping an eye on. I really like the development that we've seen from Bo Nix this season, and I'm really excited to see what he can do this week, because I feel like each and every week that goes by, he continues to further himself into that Offensive Rookie of the Year conversation, and I think he is, in my opinion, a legitimate candidate. As for who I think is going to win, I like the Broncos here, and I have them winning 24-13. I just feel really good about Denver right now in the current state that they're in. Their offense does a really good job of taking care of the ball, putting up enough points, while the defense is just giving offenses hell, and I do think that that's probably something we're going to see them do against this Colts team, and I grew up rooting for the Colts, so I feel like that says a little bit more. The next game of the week, game of the year, whatever you want to call it. The Buffalo Bills are going into Detroit to take on the Lions. The Lions, and this was I was curious about this, and so I decided to go back to when people consider the flip of the Detroit Lions franchise. That Halloween game in 2022 against the Miami Dolphins. Following that loss, the Lions have began their run, essentially, and have never looked back. Since that loss, they have only 5 losses at home. Halloween of 2022. Keep that in mind, because it's important here. All 3 of the Bills' losses so far this season have come on the road to the Ravens, Texans, and Rams. Pretty good football teams, I would say. And the Lions have not lost since week number 2 versus Tampa Bay. We are in a spot right now where I look at these two teams, and I look at the Lions especially, and I go, if there was ever a time for them to finally lose another football game, this would probably be the week to call that loss. I've been picking the Lions to win a lot of games, and I honestly could not tell you how many times I maybe picked the Lions to lose a game, and I don't think it's been very many. I really think I maybe have only picked them to lose a couple of times, and it certainly wasn't against Tampa Bay. What the Lions are doing, especially at home right now, is special and is not something that happens often. Like, yeah, you see home field advantage, but like Detroit is the definition of home field advantage right now. When you look at just how good they have been at home and what they have put up offensively at home. You have 2 of the best scoring offenses in the NFL going head to head here, with literally number 1 and number 2 between the Detroit and Buffalo. Then, of course, the average margin of victory for both these teams hanging around 16 points per game. The Lions are the 4th best third down offense to the Bills' 8th. The Bills are the 5th best offense in the red zone as far as efficiency is concerned against the Lions, who are at 6th. This is 2 high-powered offenses going head-to-head. The big concern that I have for either one of these teams goes to the Bills, because we saw last week some serious struggles defensively against the Rams, and this is a Lions offense that, in my opinion, is better than what the Rams are doing over there, and that really has me worried. And it's not even so much about defending Jared Goff and what he's been doing, and he's having an incredible season, don't get me wrong. What it's really about is them being able to stop Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, what has turned into the best 1-2 punch, the Sonic and Knuckles of the NFL. They are unbelievable as a tandem in the backfield. And right now, the way the Lions are running the football, averaging about 151 yards per game. They have 22 touchdowns on the ground. They have the 5th best rushing success rate and the 4th lowest run stuffed percentage in the league. You're going up against the Bills team right now who has honestly not been that great at stopping the run. 19th in yards per game allowed, sitting at 123 per game. 4.7 yards per attempt allowed ties them for 7th most in the league. 49 runs over 10 yards or more allowed this season, which is tied for 6th most in the league. They've been prone to letting teams move. They've been prone to letting them move often, and they've been prone to allowing big runs on top of it all. That is a recipe for disaster, and it has me worried. But then you, of course, have the Josh Allen X factor, the MVP favorite. 3 rushing touchdowns, 3 passing touchdowns last week, doing everything he can to try to keep his team in it to win it, essentially. But it was play calling that, in my opinion, cost the Bills that game with the decision on that QB sneak. I still am not over that, and it's been, 3 days now since that happened? 4 days now, and I'm still mad about that. That being said, for this game, it really comes down to just who you like most and who you trust in most. Who's in the best situation to win this football game right now? And there is a piece of me that's looking at Buffalo coming off that loss last week, and I go, there is just no way that Buffalo isn't coming out of that so angry, just gritting their teeth, chip on their shoulder because of that loss. It kind of cost them an opportunity at the number 1 seed right now, because now you're 2 games behind Kansas City. You need them to drop 2 more games to be able to get that tiebreaker with the win you have over them. They've got to win, right? Unfortunately, I'm having such a hard time convincing myself that the Lions can't win this football game. So I'm going to go Detroit. I've spent more time than I would like to admit trying to come up with a winner, and I think it's going to come down to the wire again. And I would feel awful for Bills fans if this is how it goes, but I have the Lions winning 35-34. Clutch time, whether it's a field goal, whether it's a touchdown late in the game, something tells me the Lions get it done. They are one of those teams, they basically are the Chiefs of the NFC at this moment, where it feels like everything is going their way. From Jared Goff falling down on a knee, handing off the football last week on 4th down to still get the first down and ultimately set up the game-winning field goal, to going back to like the 2 Jake Bates field goals that essentially skimmed the goalpost going in on one side and then the other. The Lions feel like they have whatever the Chiefs have going, with just everything's breaking our way this season type of deal. And that's kind of where I'm sitting with the Lions right now. So I have them 35-34. I think this is going to be a fantastic game. I think we're going to get a lot of points. There are the injuries that you can look at for the defense in Detroit as being somewhat of an issue, but both these teams are getting some guys back on both sides. Kincaid and Coleman are going to be available. Defensive line's getting healthier over in Detroit, but overall, I have such a hard time going against Detroit right now. So I'm gonna take the Lions, and I think they get the job done, especially in Detroit. Tampa Bay goes into Los Angeles for the next game that we're looking at here, and I have 2 things that I'm really looking at in this matchup. The first one being Tampa Bay's pass defense going up against Justin Herbert. With J.K. Dobbins out, the balance of this offense feels like it's kind of ruined, and that's really unfortunate, because this balanced offense in L.A., when Dobbins was healthy, made them one of the best units in the NFL, in my opinion, because they didn't need to beat you one way or the other. They could get it done however was necessary, depending on what was shaking out in that game there. When healthy, this Chargers offense is a problem, but they're not, unfortunately. Justin Herbert might only have about 2,700 yards this season, but he's thrown 14 touchdowns to just 1 interception. 14-1 touchdown to interception ratio, best in the league by far. Tampa Bay's pass defense has not been good this year. They've struggled, 3rd most in the NFL in terms of yards per game allowed with 253. They've also allowed 21 touchdowns through the air. We haven't really had to see Justin Herbert have like one of those monster performances. This feels like one of those games where it could go like that, because we've seen what Baker Mayfield has been able to do this season, and we've seen just overall that offense in Tampa Bay. They can put up numbers if they get going. So this feels like one of those games where potentially Justin Herbert needs to throw for over 300 yards, needs at least a couple of touchdown passes, maybe 3, to get the job done for them here. So that is kind of what I'm anticipating in this one, especially against that Tampa Bay defense. The other thing I'm looking at is going to be the Chargers defense just simply capitalizing on mistakes that Baker Baker Mayfield makes. I'm a huge fan of Baker Mayfield. Like, I cannot stress that enough. I love his game, the style that he plays. He is a gamer. He'll throw a pick and he's right back out the next drive like it never happened. It's the swagger, the moxie, whatever you want to call it. I'm a massive fan of it all. That being said, despite the 28 touchdowns thrown, the 70% completion rate, the 3,300 yards passing, he does have 13 interceptions this season and 5 games throwing multiple interceptions during this year alone. The Chargers' interceptions this season sitting on 13. They are actually tied for 5th most in the NFL. This is a defense that can make you pay if you make erroneous throws. And the way I see it, Baker's a gunslinger. He has no issues just throwing footballs into tight windows. He trusts his arm against anyone. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing in some situations, that's fine. It depends on the situation. I think it's fantastic to watch. It makes for really fun football, but that is something that you can critique about his game. He trusts his arm, maybe even a little bit too much at times, and he'll put balls into bad spots. But that's just the gunslinger mentality he plays with, and I respect the hell out of it. I do think there is a good chance the Chargers come away with a win here, but I am going Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay right now is currently in a position where they can lock up this NFC South with another win here, and with the way Atlanta is sputtering right now, Tampa Bay needs to keep winning. Atlanta swept them, and that's really big in that whole divisional race right now because they cannot afford to take a loss here and then have Atlanta catch a win and catch back up. So I think this game right now means a little bit more to Tampa Bay, whereas the Chargers can lose and they're still well in the playoff hunt. Yeah, this would probably drop them to a 7 seed because of the way my picks are working out right now. I have Denver winning this week, so they would flip-flop. But the Chargers are still in a really good spot as far as the playoffs are concerned, where Tampa Bay, if they don't win their division the way the NFC is shaking out, they're probably not making the playoffs. So I think this game makes a little bit more sense to say that it probably means slightly more to Tampa Bay. It means a lot to both of them, don't get me wrong, but I do give a slight edge to Tampa Bay in the means more to me department. So I'll take the Buccaneers. I think we'll get a fun one, though, 28-24, but the Buccaneers ultimately come out victorious. Next, we'll look at the Steelers going into Philadelphia, the battle for Pennsylvania supremacy. Who is going to come away with the win here? We may or may not see some rain. Last I checked, the weather was saying about a 40% chance of rain, so I do think that is something that could dictate how this game plays out a little bit. Definitely something worth keeping an eye on. But the Steelers, 10-3, the number 3 seed in the AFC right now, going up against the Eagles, who are 11-2, the number 2 seed in the NFC right now. The big question, of course, when you are facing I almost said the Falcons, the Eagles, can you stop Saquon Barkley? And that is the question that I am asking the Pittsburgh Steelers. Saquon Barkley's averaging a whopping 124 yards per game, almost 20, I would say closer to 15 maybe, about 15 or so yards more than Derrick Henry, who's trailing him in second per game right now, averaging 6.1 yards per attempt, which is also a lead best, and then 11 touchdowns on the ground. Saquon Barkley is literally rushing his way to the rushing title, I guess you could say. That being said, though, Pittsburgh's run defense has been very good this year. One of the toughest in the league to go up against. 4th in rushing yards per game allowed, allowing just 4.1 yards per attempt. They have the 8th best run stuff rate as well. You couple that with the fact that Alex Highsmith returned last week for the defense, and that's going to be really good for them in helping seal the edges off on this defensive line. Going up against Barkley, especially when he's taking those runs to the outside, I'm very, very interested in how that whole matchup right there plays itself out. I don't know if the Steelers have what it takes to stop Barkley, and that's not a knock against them because I don't know if anyone really has what it takes to stop Barkley behind the O-line in Philadelphia right now. But if I had to pick a team to get the job done, I think I would be willing to bet on the Pittsburgh Steelers. That being said, the other thing I'm looking at, though, is going to be the Steelers and their ability to find success throwing the football. One, because, again, that rain's coming, and for what it's worth, a lot of people are talking about the Eagles and their inability to throw the football, but if you look at, their passing attempts numbers, I believe they're last in the NFL. They don't have to throw the football to be successful, and a lot of people seem to be having a hard time dealing with that and are saying it's more so they can't throw the football more than they just don't need to. And that's where I more stand on that argument, is it's not that they can't throw the football. I just don't really feel like it's that necessary. They do have some struggles. Don't get me wrong. I won't sit here and act like I'm blind to everything, but with Saquon Barkley literally pacing to potentially rush for 2,000 yards this season, it's not that necessary for them. Yeah, they've maybe found themselves in some tighter games than you'd like them to see, like the game against Carolina was definitely not ideal, but you have the best rushing attack in the NFL to work with. It's kind of okay. It kind of works itself out, and defenses are not exactly the most well-equipped to stop that right now with the way the game has evolved into such a pass-heavy league. That being said, on the Steelers' end, George Pickens, dealing with a grade 2 hamstring strain is going to be a problem. It sounds like he's not going to be playing this week, and it sounds like he might not be playing for the next few weeks. Pittsburgh's going to have to rely on Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, Mike Williams, who they traded for at the trade deadline, to really fill that void, and that's a large void. I look at George Pickens as one of the absolute best wide receivers in the NFL. His ability and just like mental concentration he has to make circus catches is one of the craziest things I have ever seen in a football player, especially at a wide receiver position. It's unbelievable. I think he is one of the best, like, to use like the video game term, like best spectacular catchers in the NFL. Like, he just makes wow catch after wow catch each and every single week, and it's incredible to watch. Philadelphia's secondary, though, is going to give them a headache. And I would have said that whether Pickens was playing or not, but more so now if Pickens is not playing. You look at the massive shot in both arms that this defense got, which was very much needed coming after last season in the form of Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, two guys that are in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year right now. Philadelphia's pass defense is allowing the second fewest yards per game and fewest yards per play against the pass, and the fewest yards per play against the pass by half a yard. So they are very much one of the best, if not arguably the best pass defenses in the NFL right now. You couple that with a defensive front that has been wreaking havoc on opposing offensive lines, and it could be a long day for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This game, especially if it ends up raining, I think winds up being one of those uglier, low-scoring, Steelers-esque type of games. Lower scoring contest, grinded out to the finish line. Somebody is going to beat the other team's ass to the finish line type of game. And I think I'm going Philadelphia. It's going to be tight. It's going to be ugly. It certainly won't be pretty. But I like the Eagles 20-16 right now. I really like the current state of them and just what they're doing. I do absolutely think the Steelers have a shot to win this football game, because in these types of games, Pittsburgh loves to be involved in that type of matchup. So I could see them wrestling away a win here. But I really, really respect what Philadelphia is doing right now, in spite of what seems to be everyone hating, or not hating, or just focusing way too much on their inability to throw the football and less on the fact that this team is 11-2. Next, we'll look at the Green Bay Packers going into Seattle to take on the Seahawks, a rivalry renewed that I have personally gotten to watch happen since the very first dual catch thing in the end zone years ago. I think that was back in like 2016. So it's always fun to see these two teams match up here. Both of these teams need to find a way to win this football game. Seattle obviously wants to maintain their lead in the NFC North, whereas Green Bay doesn't really want to fall any lower in the playoff seedings right now, with the Rams fighting for their playoff lives at 8-5 right behind them. Or was it not 8-5? I'm sorry, 7-6. What are the Rams now? 8-6. Excuse me, 8-6. So you can't really afford to lose another game and close that gap even further, because the Rams are pushing for a playoff spot as the number 8 seed right now in the NFC. First thing I'm looking at is going to be that Packers secondary against the Seahawks wide receivers. Jackson Smith-Njigba has been on a tear for Seattle this season, one of only 4 players with 75 catches, at least 900 yards, and 5 touchdowns. You, of course, have the size-speed mismatch of DK Metcalf, the ageless Tyler Lockett, who continues to be a piece of this offense, no matter how old he is. Going up against the Packers secondary that's been pretty thin. Jair Alexander has been missing time, but it seems like he could be back this week. Corey Ballentine is out. And then, of course, Javon Bullard dealing with an ankle injury. He could miss the game as well. Definitely curious to see how that plays itself out. And then, of course, Seattle and their ability to protect Geno Smith, which seems like a storyline that we've been watching since the days of Russell Wilson in Seattle. Geno Smith was not sacked last week against Arizona. That's the first time that Seattle has not allowed a sack since week 18 of 2023. So the fact that Seattle hasn't allowed a sack in a game shows maybe they're making some slight progress in doing so. We'll see, but they have allowed 40 so far this season. Green Bay is about an average pass rush or so this season by the numbers. 11 sacks, though, in their last 4 games, so nearly about 3 per game. They have picked up a little bit of steam over the last month or so, but definitely something I'm keeping an eye on there. As for who I think is going to win, I think this is going to be another one of those good games between Seattle and Green Bay, and I feel like those games typically are. When Seattle and Green Bay are playing, whether it's in Lambeau, whether it's in Seattle, both those teams bring their absolute best, and there seems to be some serious animosity between the fan bases ever since that the touchdown interception multi-catch game between the defensive back and wide receiver at I'll never forget that turned what never seemed like a big deal type of game into a whole thing. So I think this one will be fun. I think it'll be tight, but I'm taking the Packers 30-27 to get the win here, keep themselves nice and safe, makes things a little bit closer in the NFC West, and the Seattle Seahawks will have a little bit of a hill to climb, but I do think I like Green Bay going into Seattle to pick up the win. This next one here, Chicago is going into Minnesota. Chicago comes in 0-3 against the NFC North at this current moment, having lost to each and every single team. So now they're going to make their second round through the division here. Sam Darnold, meanwhile, is in the middle of a career resurgence in Minnesota, and honestly, one that I'm finally starting to believe in at this current point here. I've spent a lot of time this season doubting Sam Darnold, and I've gotten into a lot of conversations with Vikings fans about Sam Darnold this season and just my doubts that I have about him, but I am starting to come to terms with the fact that, honestly, at this point, I might think it's a mistake if Minnesota lets him walk, and that is not where I was at the beginning of this season whatsoever. So I think that should say a lot about how well Sam Darnold has played this year overall. Game 1 ended in overtime 30-27 on a game-winning field goal by Minnesota, and Caleb Williams actually had what is arguably his best game of his young rookie season so far, with season highs in completions of 10, yards at 156, and touchdowns with 2 versus Minnesota's blitz in that first matchup. And honestly, in terms of total numbers, 340 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 68% completion rate, it was probably his best game that he's had so far in his career. No team blitzes more than Minnesota this season, so if you look at their near 39% blitz rate, they've got to turn that pressure into sacks in this game and actually get to Caleb Williams. He clearly found a rhythm against them. You can't have that happen again this time around, especially with how much is at stake right now. The Lions are a slip up away from potentially giving you an opportunity to steal the division away from them the next time you play them. So if Minnesota is playing for a lot right now. They are the number 5 seed and could very easily jump up and find themselves being the number 2 seed, number 1 seed, if they're able to, again, A, have Detroit lose a game, and then B, beat Detroit on top of that. So there is a lot on the line for Minnesota here. Meanwhile, Chicago, near the bottom of the NFC at 4-9. Not really sure what we're going to get from them in this game here, especially after the firing of Eberflus. That last game against the 49ers was not pretty, and that kind of feels like a team that may have just kind of completely given up on the season. I don't know, but you're also going up against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, who the last 3 weeks have been a bit of a nightmare to defend. Between Addison's 162-yard game against Chicago the last time they played, and then just overall combined since that game against the Bears, between those two, 36 catches, 607 yards, and 6 touchdowns. They've been going off. They've been having some big games. Jalen Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon, they all are going to need to have a big game. And the first time that they played, it wasn't those guys that were letting up the big plays. A bulk majority of the yards came from TJ Edwards and Terrell Smith. 123 of those Jordan Addison yards from that 162 came from them, and that's according to PFF, so you take that with what you will, but a place I could find a tangible number to point blame to is basically what I was trying to do there. So we'll see, but the way things stand right now, I like Minnesota. I think they'll win somewhat comfortably this time around, especially in Minnesota, that last game being in Chicago. Things can get weird, but I do like the Vikings 28-14. And then, of course, to wrap up the weekend, or Monday night, I guess I should say, or both these games are on Monday night, aren't they? That's right, Monday Night Football. We have a doubleheader this week. You know how I feel about that. Let's stop doing that, please. But doubleheader on Monday Night Football, Falcons into Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. This is a game the Falcons absolutely should be winning. Absolutely. This is the Desmond Ridder revenge game, if you want to add the little wrinkle to it, but this is a game that the Falcons should absolutely be winning. Now, Kirk Cousins, for what it's worth, has not played well the last month. 8 interceptions, 0 touchdowns his last 4 games. Thankfully, Las Vegas, not really a team to turn the ball over through the air too often. They only have 7 picks on the season, a little bit lower than middle of the pack in the NFL. And then Desmond Ridder, for what he's done this season, 64% completion rate, touchdown, 239 yards in the limited opportunities that he's seen so far this year. I mean, the big thing really just comes down to like slowing down Brock Bowers, I guess I could say, for Atlanta. He has 87 catches this season. He's second in the NFL. And then, of course, the 933 yards he has. I mean, Bowers has been unbelievable for the Raiders here. And then, of course, Jacoby Myers working alongside him, that kind of 1-2 punch receiving combo they have in Las Vegas. But, I mean, just Atlanta, the way it stacks up, they have more talent. And they're in a much better spot right now. They should be winning this game. You have Drake London and Darnell Mooney, who are combining for 1,700 yards as a duo, receiving the ball. Of course, Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson as well. The Raiders are kind of like in the fast lane right now to potentially locking up the first overall pick in the draft. And the Falcons, having lost the division in their 4-game skid they're currently on, a loss here would not doom them from winning the division, but it put them in a spot where it's very unlikely. So, as I've been saying, this is a game that it's Atlanta's to lose. It really is. They need to win this football game, and they should win this football game. And despite the fact that they have been struggling these last 4 weeks, I am going to take them here, but I can envision like a complicated victory for Atlanta. So I have the Falcons winning, but I have them winning 23-19. So those are my picks for week number 15 of the NFL. We are working through the final month of the NFL regular season for 2024. I can't believe we're already this far into the year. But let me know in that comment section down below, who do you think's coming out victorious? Who's going home with wins, losses? Who's going to have big games? Fire away in that comment section down below. Love hearing from you all. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.